Rock and roll and metal. It's a combination that doesn't too often work together, but sometimes it is just magical work of love and beyond. This time we head about the very topic to Germany with a band called Chapel of Disease and their latest album. This is how it looks. Beautiful digipack release through Ván Records. And in case you're wondering, Echoes of Light is the name of this album. So, first, let's start with the name. I was told, reading about it, that this name is a beautiful combination of certain Morbid Angel, not releases, but songs, and that is, Angel of Disease and Chapel of Ghouls, which makes sense, especially if you want to do old school death metal. Now, for some reason, I don't even pretend to know it. I'm just guessing that the reason is review work. I have missed the previous album of this given band, so I don't know how to compare this band's early music to whatever Morbid Angel were doing, but according to Metal Archives, the claims are they used to play death metal, which makes sense to pick name for a band from one of the best death metal bands in human history. However, with this album, and it seems also the previous ones, the band has changed their style quite a bit, and now it gets peculiar. This new album of 2024, fourth in question, let's take the band's Metal Archive site here for the backdrop, they have changed their style. And here it is said on the Metal Archive site, death metal early, progressive death metal / hard rock later on. Curious thing really, because when I was listening to this and I was expecting some kind of a metal to begin with, I was a little bit shocked. This is of course exaggeration. I don't really get shocked when listening to music, but let's play a game here. So I was expecting some kind of a metal album. For some reason, first of all, I was thinking black metal, but yeah, death metal was supposed to be the name of the game, and this turned out to be more rock and roll rather than metal to begin with. And I was like, okay, what's the story? And then I went for Metal Archives to check out, the links and get the amount of albums released in their discography, and then my eyes went for the genre, and I was like, okay, makes sense. When I was talking to this album while listening to it, to some of the people online on Rauta's Discord, or Rauta Cord if you will, some of them mentioned, yeah, it's actually like Dire Straits doing death metal. I was like, yeah, kind of makes sense. But even better was when I was reading it's like Eric Clapton doing death metal. And that's when it really clicked. Because first of all, I was thinking about like this is Ghost for people who don't like Ghost. So metal background, even in death metal, but turned or translated into rock and roll music. The kind of old fashioned if you will really think about it. Ghost is kind of a retro band, and so is this particular band, too, founded in 2008 in Germany and all. So Chapel of Disease, whatever it started with the death metal thing going on, Echoes of Light is more like retro rock and roll. Call it hard rock or rock and roll music with metallic ideas or instrumentations or whatever. But it is more rock and roll and old school it is. Then I was thinking it kind of makes sense to think of bands like Tribulation, Cloak, what have you, which are more the death of rock and roll, especially Tribulations later on. And when I went for similar artists, Tribulation is actually mentioned there, but also quite a list of old school death metal bands, but they don't really resonate with death metal. And that shows the problem with, voting Metal Archives. While I love the system that you can actually vote for similar artists. I'm going to show it to you quickly because we go a little bit off track here. The similar artist thing works so well when a band doesn't change the style. I mean, if Burzum was still doing just black metal, nobody would, vote similar artists from the Dungeons department. Or if Darkthrone was still doing, black metal, or even that early death metal, people would be like, okay, this sounds this and that. But when the bands change their style, suddenly this list makes no sense. So when you look at the list, people are saying like Pestilence. No, this doesn't sound like Pestilence. If you're thinking of Asphyx, Death, Morbid Angel, Skeletal Remains, which is more like Cannibal Corpse. Get the fuck out of here. It has nothing to do with it, with the current status. Then again, if you really take a look at these bands like coming from Sweden, for example, Morbus Crohn or its sidekick Sveven, yeah, it starts making more sense. These are labeled here as progressive death metal, but at least it's a little bit closer to this one because they do have rock and roll elements. Tribulation indeed makes even more sense because what they started with was death metal. Then again, later on went to rather rock-infused gothic metal. I wouldn't say this album, Echoes of Light, really sounds like a gothic metal, but there are similarities with later Tribulation. So if you have heard it, you now kind of know it. But forget all the Morbid Angels and Skeletal Remains and these other more typical death metal bands. So Paradise Lost, what the hell? There are no that much similarities. But then again, it's also a band that changed its style more than once. So it depends whether you're listening to Host or, say, second album, Gothic. And then you go mind drifting about what the genre is actually all about. So forget this death metal early when we're talking about this album Echoes of Light. Because this is indeed, I would say roughly 95% rock and roll. 90 if you really go bargaining with me. And the rest, yeah, it's metal. So the metal kind of seeps through the cracks and all, but still it's mostly metal. Meaning it has kind of a retro-ish old school sound, 70s or 80s, doesn't really matter. My point here, it doesn't sound anything like modern. And that is a good thing for a lot of us older metalheads, or those who have the soft spot for somewhat retro-ish take on the music and all. Now, where it gets complicated is that these songs are quite lengthy. I mean, could you really imagine a lot of those old school rock and roll hits, whether we're talking about the Eric Claptons or Dire Straits or whatever, do you think these Blue Oyster Cults would go for some 8 or 9 minute songs? Probably a single case scenario, but much like back in the days Iron Maiden and the like. The songs were short and sweet, 3, 4, 5 minutes in max, and it was an exception when you would go something like 8 or 10 minutes mark. Nowadays, a different thing. So this is where Chapel of Disease goes kind of weird. It kind of taps into the very vein of old school music, yet at the same time none of these tracks in the sense of when you combine the style and the length doesn't really sound like that. So it's kind of a hybrid. And that means this is more like a revisionistic take on old school hard rock music with metal familiarity or similarity. So it's kind of a weird, because if you would go old school ways, you probably do shorter songs and keep it more compact. Because that it was. If you wanted to be played on a radio, you needed a short track. Nobody's going to listen to your song for 8 minutes on a radio, unless you're some kind of a Metallica or Iron Maiden to begin with. But, point aside, this is the kind of a what-if take on history. If you know what if comic book series is, then you know what I'm talking about. If not, forget about it. I'm just saying this is like, much like those sci-fi versions, like how the future in 2000 would be when you were writing a sci-fi novel back in the 50s. Truth is quite different from reality. So this is kind of like that inverted. What if history was like this? Then you would get albums like this. But no, this sounds like modern at the same time as it sounds old-fashioned, which makes this partially quite interesting. But I'll be honest with it, I'm not a big fan of old school rock and roll music. Not anything beyond hard rock, really. Because it's not just the type of stuff that I enjoy that much listening. I'll have no problem listening to it, but it's not my cup of tea. However, if you like this weird combo, give this one a go. It's out since February 2024. And if you feel rock and roll and death metal work nicely, then give it a go. Oh, bye-bye.